The sky itself cracks with the thunder of divine armies. Legendary weapons clash in battles that forged our world. We are embarking on a journey through 30 spectacular tales of mythical warfare. These are the epic conflicts that have shaped cultures and ignited human imagination for thousands of years. They are more than simple stories. They are the grand adventures and profound mysteries at the very heart of our history. You will uncover the hidden truths behind humanity's oldest and most powerful stories. What cosmic secrets were the Greek gods fighting for in their war against the Titans? Why did the Norse gods who could not die wage a war that ended in a truce? These ancient battles hold a mirror to our own world. What part of these legendary conflicts feels most alive to you today? Before any hero walked the earth, the universe was ruled by ancient primordial forces. This is the story of the Titanomachy, the war for cosmic supremacy that forged the world as we know it. The conflict pitted the new Olympian gods, led by the cunning Zeus, against the old god, the mighty Titans commanded by his father, the tyrannical Cronus. Cronus, who had once overthrown his own father, lived in fear of a prophecy that he too would be overthrown by his child. In a desperate attempt to cheat fate, he swallowed each of his children at birth. But his wife, Rhea, could not bear the loss. When her sixth child, Zeus, was born, she hid him away and tricked Cronus into swallowing a stone instead. The young god grew in secret, waiting for his moment. When Zeus came of age, he forced his father to disgorge his brothers and sisters, the powerful deities who would become the Olympians. United, this new generation declared war on the old. The war that followed was not a brief skirmish. It was a cataclysm that raged for 10 long years, shaking the very foundations of creation. The Olympians had power, but the Titans were vast in number and strength. Victory required a new kind of army. Zeus journeyed to the deepest pits of the earth and freed 3 monstrous beings imprisoned by Cronus, the Hecatoncheires. Their name means the 100-handed ones, and they were living weapons, each capable of hurling 100 boulders at once. Alongside them came the Cyclopes, master forgers who crafted the god's ultimate armaments, forging for Zeus his iconic weapon, the thunderbolt. With these new allies, the tide of the war turned. The final battle was a spectacle of raw, elemental power. The sky shattered with Zeus's lightning. The earth cracked open as Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, causing earthquakes that toppled the Titans. The Hecatoncheires blanketed the enemy with a relentless barrage of mountains. It was a victory of strategy and new alliances over brute, stagnant force. The defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, a gloomy abyss as far below the earth as the earth is from the sky, and the Hecatoncheires became their eternal gods. This myth was the ancient Greeks' way of explaining the world around them. The rumble of thunder was the echo of Zeus's rage. The tremors of an earthquake were Poseidon stirring beneath the land. More importantly, it established a new order, a divine rule based not on fear and consumption, but on law and sovereignty. The triumph of the Olympians set the stage for every hero's quest and every human drama that would follow in Greek mythology, creating the pantheon whose stories still resonate with us today. But the Norse gods understood that true strength required more than victory. Their great war was not fought for cosmic control, but for a fragile, hard-won peace. This is the story of the Aesir-Vanir War, a conflict between the 2 great tribes of the Norse pantheon. On one side stood the Aesir, gods of power, poetry, and the sky, led by the wise and relentless Odin. Opposing them were the Vanir, masters of fertility, magic, and the earth, whose gifts of abundance sustained the world itself. No one knows for certain what sparked the fighting. Some stories say the Aesir grew suspicious of the Vanir's potent Seder magic, a form of sorcery they viewed as unmanly and dangerous. Others suggest it was a simple, irreconcilable clash of cultures, the structured order of the Aesir meeting the wild, intuitive nature of the Vanir. And so the 2 families of gods went to war. This was a conflict unlike any other, for the combatants were divine and could not be permanently slain. A god might fall in battle one day, only to be whole again the next, ready to fight anew. The war dragged on, a brutal, cyclical stalemate where neither side could achieve a decisive victory. They fought until both sides grew weary of the endless, futile bloodshed. They realized that continued conflict would only lead to mutual exhaustion, a world left barren by gods who could not die but could only suffer. And so, in a moment of profound wisdom, they did something extraordinary. They laid down their weapons and negotiated a truce. To seal this new peace, they performed a ritual of profound significance, an exchange of hostages. The Vanir sent their wisest, the god Njord and his twin children, the beautiful Freya and Freyja, to live among the Aesir. In return, the Aesir sent Honir, a god known for his imposing stature, and the incredibly wise Mimir. This exchange was meant to bind the two tribes together, to ensure that each side had a vested interest in the other's well-being, but the peace was almost broken. The Vanir soon felt they had been deceived. They discovered that Honir, while looking like a great leader, was indecisive and relied entirely on Mimir's counsel for every judgment. Enraged, they beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Odin. This could have been the end of the fragile truce, a return to endless war. Yet Odin, in his deep wisdom, did not seek revenge. He preserved Mimir's head with herbs and charms, and through his magic he gave it the power of speech. The head of Mimir became one of his greatest sources of counsel, a permanent, gruesome reminder of the cost of misunderstanding and the value of wisdom. This war did not end with one side cast into a dark pit. It ended with a unification. The Aesir and Vanir became one pantheon, their strengths combined. Freya and Freyja brought their potent magic of fertility and Seda into the halls of the Aesir, enriching their power. This myth reveals a core Norse value, that the greatest victory is not total domination, but a peace that creates something stronger than what existed before. It is a story that champions diplomacy and the blending of different strengths, where the warrior's spear and the farmer's plow are both honored as essential to survival. Yet even a peace forged by gods cannot erase the human struggle with duty. The battlefield of Kurukshetra was not a clash of divine tribes, but a devastating war between two branches of the same royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. This was a conflict so immense, so deeply personal, that it became the centerpiece of the epic Mahabharata, a story that explores the very essence of righteous action. The 5 Pandava brothers, rightful heirs to the kingdom, were cheated out of their throne and forced into exile for 13 years by their 100 cousins, the jealous and power-hungry Kauravas. When their exile ended and their pleas for a peaceful return of their lands were met with arrogant refusal, war became inevitable. But this was not a simple tale of good versus evil. Both sides contained noble warriors and flawed men. The lines of righteousness, of Dharma, were terrifyingly blurred. As the two colossal armies faced each other on the field of Kurukshetra, the air thick with the tension of impending slaughter, the great archer Arjuna asked his charioteer, the god Krishna, to drive him into the space between the two forces. There he looked upon his teachers, his grandfather, and his own cousins arrayed against him. His spirit broke. How could he possibly raise his bow against his own family? How could any victory be worth this profound sin? He laid down his legendary weapon, the Gandiva bow, and declared he would not fight. It is at this moment of supreme moral crisis that Krishna delivers the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. This was not a command to blindly kill. It was a profound philosophical discourse on the nature of the soul, duty, and detachment. Krishna explained that the eternal soul cannot be slain. He guided Arjuna to understand that his sacred duty, his dharma as a warrior, was to fight for justice without attachment to the fruits of his actions, to the personal outcome of victory or loss. This divine council on the battlefield reframed the entire war from a political struggle into a spiritual imperative. The war that followed was fought with otherworldly ferocity, featuring the deployment of celestial weapons known as astras. These were not mere swords and spears, they were mantras given physical form, invoked through sacred chants and capable of unleashing elemental devastation. Arjuna wielded the irresistible Pashupatastra, a weapon of Shiva, while his brother Bhima faced the terrifying Narayanastra, a creation of Vishnu that rained down millions of mystical missiles. The use of such power came with sacred rules, and when those rules were broken, the consequences were catastrophic. The final day of the war saw the ultimate transgression. With his army in ruins, the Kaurava commander Dronacharya was nearly invincible. To defeat him, the Pandavas spread the false rumor that his son had died. Hearing this, the grief-stricken Dronacharya laid down his weapons and was killed while in meditation. This act, a necessary lie for victory, haunted the Pandavas forever, a stark reminder that even a righteous cause can be stained by unethical deeds. After 18 brutal days, the war ended. The Pandavas were victorious, but their triumph was hollow. Nearly every warrior on both sides was dead. The field of Kurukshetra was a silent, horrifying landscape of millions of corpses. The victors inherited a kingdom of ashes and widows, their own family all but destroyed. The Mahabharata uses this cataclysm to ask its audience the most difficult questions. What does it mean to do your duty when every choice seems wrong? Can a war be just if the path to victory is paved with lies? The epic offers no easy answers, instead presenting a mirror to our own complex moral dilemmas, proving that the truest battles are often not fought for land or power, but within the human heart. A kingdom of gold and magic built on a foundation of wickedness stood across the ocean. This is the Battle of Lanka from the Ramayana, a war sparked not by a throne but by a wife's abduction. The demon king Ravana, a being of immense power with 10 heads and 20 arms, had stolen Prince Rama's beloved wife, Sita, imprisoning her in his island fortress. Rama, an incarnation of the god Vishnu, embodied virtue and righteous duty. His quest to rescue Sita was a mission that would define the very nature of good and evil. He was not alone in this impossible task. His loyal brother Lakshmana stood by his side, but his most powerful allies came from an unexpected place. He forged an alliance with an army of Vanaras, a race of intelligent, monkey-like beings of incredible strength and agility. Their general was Hanuman, a figure of pure devotion and limitless power. Hanuman's leap across the ocean to find Sita in Lanka is a legend in itself, a testament to his unwavering faith in Rama's cause. On the other side, Ravana commanded a terrifying host of Rakshasas, shape-shifting demons skilled in dark sorcery and brutal warfare. His city was protected not just by walls, but by powerful magical illusions and legions of fierce warriors. The war began with a monumental feat of engineering. Rama's Vanara army built a bridge of floating stones across the sea, a testament to their collective will and devotion. Once the forces met on the island, the battle unfolded in a series of spectacular duels. Ravana's son, Indrajit, a master of mystical weapons, proved to be a devastating foe. He struck down both Rama and Lakshmana with the powerful Nagapasha, a serpent weapon that bound them in enchanted coils, rendering them near death. Only the magical healing herbs brought by the swift-flying Hanuman from a faraway mountain saved their lives. The final confrontation was a spectacle of divine power. Rama and Ravana faced each other in a chariot duel that raged across the sky. Ravana, with his 10 heads, seemed invincible, as each time one head was struck down, another would grow in its place. He used every weapon in his vast arsenal, from magical spears to illusions, but Rama, guided by virtue and armed with the celestial bow given to him by the gods, remained focused. The secret to Ravana's defeat lay in his own arrogance. His life force was contained within his navel, and Rama, with a single, perfectly aimed arrow, pierced that hidden weakness. The demon king fell, and his golden city, built on tyranny, was liberated. The reunion of Rama and Sita is one of the most poignant moments in all of literature, a symbol of love's triumph over evil. Yet the story does not end with a simple celebration. Rama's victory was one of dharma, of righteous conduct, and he felt compelled to question Sita's purity after her long captivity in another man's house. To prove her unwavering devotion, Sita underwent a trial by fire, emerging unscathed, her virtue proven to all. The epic concludes with their return to the kingdom of Ayodhya in Ravana's own flying chariot, the Pushpaka Vimana, a journey that marks the beginning of a golden age of peace and justice. The Ramayana is more than a rescue mission. It is a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of loyalty, the burden of duty, and the unshakable belief that good, no matter how outmatched, will ultimately prevail. The green hills of Ireland were once stained with the blood of its first divine rulers. The first battle of Mag Tuaid was not a simple territorial dispute, but a war of succession between two legendary races for the soul of the land itself. The Firbolg, a people said to possess great strength, held Ireland. They were challenged by the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, who arrived in a magical mist, bringing with them 4 incredible treasures, including the unbreakable spear of Lug and the stone of destiny that would cry out under the rightful king. The two armies met on the field of Mag Tuaid, and the battle was decided by a single, grievous wound. The Tuatha De Danann's king, Nuada, faced the Firbolg champion Esreng in a mighty duel. In the clash, Esreng severed Nuada's arm. Under the ancient laws of kingship, a ruler had to be physically whole, and so the maimed Nuada was forced to relinquish his throne. This loss, however, led to the rise of a new kind of hero, Brez, a king whose poor rule would later set the stage for an even greater conflict. The war was ultimately won not just by strength of arms, but by the Tuatha De Danann's mastery of powerful sorcery. They used druidic magic to cast a fog of darkness over the battlefield, to hurl fire upon their enemies, and to control the very weather. Their victory established them as the gods of Ireland, beings whose connection to the land was one of magic and mystical sovereignty, a bond that would echo through Irish folklore for centuries. Centuries later, across the sea, another legendary kingdom faced its own tragic end. The world of King Arthur and his Round Table, built on the ideals of chivalry and justice, shattered not from an external enemy but from a betrayal from within. The final, terrible battle of Camlan was a civil war, a conflict between Arthur's own knights, sparked by the treachery of his son, Mordred. While Arthur was away, Mordred seized the throne and attempted to marry Queen Guinevere, forcing the king to return and confront his own blood. The two armies met on the field at Camlan, and what followed was not a glorious charge but a grim, desperate slaughter. The flower of English knighthood fell upon itself, friend killing friend in a chaotic melee that left the field soaked in red. In the heart of the chaos, Arthur and Mordred found each other. The king drove his spear through his son, but as Mordred fell, he delivered a final, mortal blow to his father. With his last strength, the legendary king commanded that his sword, Excalibur, be thrown back into the lake from whence it came. As the mystical hand of the Lady of the Lake rose to catch it, a barge appeared, carrying Arthur away to the mystical Isle of Avalon, a place of healing from which he would one day promise to return. These two wars, one for a land's divine right and the other for a kingdom's soul, paint a powerful picture of a fading age. The Celtic world of Mag Tuaid is one where sovereignty is a magical force, won and lost through direct connection to the earth and the power of druidic will. In contrast, the Arthurian world of Camlan is a human tragedy where the downfall comes from the failure of ideals, the breaking of oaths, and the corruption of the very chivalric code that held the kingdom together. One story tells of gods claiming a land through sorcery, the other of a mortally wounded king leaving his, a haunting question lingering over the water. What happens when the magic fades and the last ideal is broken? Even the Olympians' victory could not bring a lasting peace. A deeper, more ancient rage was stirring. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was furious at the imprisonment of her children, the Titans, and she bred a new race of monsters to challenge the gods themselves. This was the Gigantomachy, the War of the Giants, a second cosmic struggle that threatened to tear down the very order Zeus had fought so hard to establish. The giants were not merely large men. They were terrifying beings of immense power with scaly legs ending in serpentine coils, born from the blood of Uranus that fell upon the earth. They were elemental chaos given form, and their strength was so immense that a fateful prophecy declared they could not be defeated by the gods alone. A mortal hero was needed to turn the tide, a champion who walked the line between the human and the divine. That hero was Hercules. With his legendary club and poisoned arrows, the son of Zeus joined the fray, his mortal presence the key to fulfilling the prophecy and sealing the fate of the giants. The battles were epic and defined the landscape of the ancient world. The giant Alcyoneus was immortal only within his homeland of Pallene. Hercules, realizing this, dragged the monstrous being across the border and slew him there. The giant Enceladus, a figure of pure fury, was defeated by the goddess of wisdom herself. Athena, ever strategic, did not merely strike him down. She hurled the entire island of Sicily upon him, burying him forever beneath the weight of the earth. To this day, they say his restless breath is the fire that spews from Mount Etna. Even the newest of the gods, Dionysus, proved his might. Wielding his thyrsus, a fennel staff tipped with a pine cone, he routed entire bands of giants, his wild, ecstatic power proving more than a match for their brute force. This war was more than a simple sequel. It represented the final, definitive triumph of the civilized cosmos over the untamed wild. The gods, with their laws, their arts, and their structured domains, stood against the raw, mindless chaos of the earth. This struggle was so central to the Greek worldview that it was immortalized in breathtaking detail on the Pergamon altar, a massive monument whose sculpted frieze captures the violent, twisting bodies of the giants locked in their final, desperate struggle against the serene and powerful gods. The Gigantomachy answered a profound question for the ancient Greeks. Why do earthquakes shake the ground and volcanoes scorch the land? It is not the rage of the titans, but the restless, imprisoned giants stirring beneath the soil, a permanent reminder that order is a fragile construct, forever besieged by the chaotic forces of nature. The rage of giants gave way to the passions of mortals in a war where a single golden apple could topple a civilization. The Trojan War stands as the ultimate collision of human ambition and divine meddling, a 10-year siege that became the cornerstone of Western literature. It all began not on a battlefield but at a wedding. The goddess of discord, Eris, furious at not being invited, tossed a golden apple into the celebration, inscribed with the words for the fairest. 3 powerful goddesses immediately claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. They left the impossible decision to a mortal, a Trojan prince named Paris, who was tending his flocks on Mount Ida. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised boundless political power and kingship over all nations. Athena offered unmatched wisdom and invincible skill in war. But Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by desire, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. His prize was Helen, the wife of the Greek king Menelaus. When Paris abducted her and brought her to Troy, he set in motion a conflict that would consume both Greece and Asia Minor for a decade. The gods themselves were far from neutral spectators. They chose sides and descended into the fray, directly influencing the outcome of battles. Aphrodite protected Paris, whisking him away from certain death. Athena fought for the Greeks, while Apollo and his sister Artemis often aided the Trojans. This was not a distant, detached pantheon, but a family of powerful beings using humanity as pawns in their own celestial rivalries. The war produced heroes whose names would echo for millennia. On the Greek side, there was Achilles, the greatest warrior of his age, nearly invincible because his mother had dipped him in the magical river Styx as an infant. But she had held him by his heel, leaving one small spot vulnerable. His rage and subsequent withdrawal from battle after a quarrel with King Agamemnon formed the emotional core of Homer's Iliad. For the Trojans, there was Hector, the noble prince and defender of his city, a family man fighting for his home, whose final duel with Achilles is one of the most heartbreaking moments in all of epic poetry. The war was filled with fantastical elements beyond Achilles' near invulnerability. The Greek hero Odysseus, a man of cunning intellect rather than pure strength, conceived of the plan that would finally break the stalemate. The Greeks built a colossal, hollow wooden horse, left it on the beach as an apparent offering to the gods, and pretended to sail away. The Trojans, believing the war was over and the horse was a trophy, dragged the massive structure inside their impregnable walls. That night, Greek soldiers hidden within the horse crept out and opened the city gates for their returning army. Troy was sacked and burned to the ground, its civilization erased in a single night of blood and fire. But did any of this truly happen? The line between myth and history blurs profoundly here. For centuries, the Trojan War was considered pure fiction. Then, in the late 19th century, a wealthy German businessman and amateur archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann became obsessed with Homer's epic. He began excavating a large mound in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. To the astonishment of the world, he uncovered the ruins of not one but multiple cities, built one on top of the other over thousands of years. One of these layers, known as Troy 7a, shows clear evidence of violent destruction by fire and warfare, dating roughly to the period the war was said to have occurred. Was this the Troy of Priam and Hector? The archaeological evidence is compelling but inconclusive. There is no inscribed horse, no spear labeled property of Achilles. The site reveals a wealthy, powerful city that controlled trade through the Dardanelles, a city that was indeed destroyed in a great conflagration. This suggests a kernel of historical truth, a catastrophic war between the Mycenaean Greeks and a rival Anatolian power, a conflict so monumental that it was woven into legend over centuries, embellished with gods and monsters. The story of Troy forces us to wonder where the line truly lies. Is the legend a poetic memory of a real geopolitical struggle, a Bronze Age world war? Or is the ruined city of Hisarlik merely a skeleton upon which the Greeks hung their greatest story of love, honor, and the terrible cost of pride? The walls of Asgard were not built for a single siege, but for an endless, chilling dread. While the gods had made peace with the Vanir, their conflict with the Jotnar, the frost giants of Jotunheim, was a perpetual cold war, punctuated by brutal raids and deceptive visits. This was not one great battle, but a world defined by the constant threat of chaos. The Jotnar were the embodiment of the untamed wilderness, the crushing ice, the barren mountain, and the howling storm. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, was their primary adversary, and his legendary hammer, Mjolnir, was more than a weapon. It was a divine instrument of order, crushing giant skulls to keep the frost from swallowing the realms. His adventures were not grand campaigns, but desperate journeys into the heart of the enemy's territory. In one famous tale, he traveled to the hall of the giant king Utgard Loki, a master of illusion. There, Thor was humiliated in a series of contests. He struggled to drain a drinking horn connected to the sea itself, failed to lift a cat that was actually the world serpent, Jormungandr, and lost a wrestling match to an old woman named Ellie, who was old age personified. He had been tricked, not outfought, a reminder that the giants' power lay as much in cunning as in brute strength. The giants were not always distant enemies at the gate. They were a constant, invasive presence. They would launch assaults on Asgard's very walls, forcing the gods to be eternally vigilant. The relationship was deeply complex, a tangled web of violence, kinship, and deception. The gods and giants were not separate races but closely related families. Odin himself was the son of a giantess, and many gods, including Thor, had giant blood. They intermarried, they bargained, and they broke oaths. A visiting giant could be a guest one night and a saboteur the next, blurring the line between ally and mortal foe. Loki, the trickster god, was himself a child of giants, and his loyalties swung wildly between protecting Asgard and orchestrating its downfall. These endless conflicts were the Norse way of explaining humanity's fragile existence. Every crashing thunderclap was Thor driving back the forces of ice and darkness with Mjolnir. The long, deadly winter was a time when the giants' influence grew strong. The struggle was not for total victory, for the chaotic wild could never be truly eradicated, only held at bay. It was a cosmic balance, a daily battle for survival against a world that was actively trying to kill you, a world where the greatest hero was the one who kept the walls standing for one more day. Far from the cold northern walls, a different kind of order descended from the heavens. In the serene mythology of Japan, the world began not with a clash of titans, but with a deliberate act of celestial pacification. The Kojiki, Japan's ancient chronicle, tells of a time when the earth was a wild and untamed place, known as the Central Land of Reed Plains. It was ruled by the Kurukshetra, the earthly deities, whose chaotic nature made the land unruly and rough. Looking down from the high plane of heaven, the Amatsukomi, the heavenly deities, decided this chaos could not stand. They decreed that the reed plains must be pacified and brought under the sway of a heavenly mandate. This was not to be a war of annihilation, but a mission of divine civilization. The first attempts were diplomatic failures. The heavenly gods sent a minor deity named Aim no Hohai to persuade the earthly gods to submit. But he became so enamored with the world below that he never returned to deliver his report. They sent a second messenger, Aim no Wakahiko, a heavenly youth armed with a celestial bow and arrows. He too was seduced by the earthly realm, even marrying the daughter of an earthly deity and ruling as a lord for 8 years, forgetting his heavenly mission entirely. His end came when a heavenly pheasant was sent to check on him, and in a panic he shot it with his own arrow. The arrow flew back to the heavens, where the outraged gods hurled it back to earth, striking the treacherous messenger dead. These failures taught the Amatsukomi a crucial lesson, that the land's chaos was so potent it could corrupt even divine will. A different approach was needed. The heavenly assembly turned to its most powerful figures. They chose to send the divine grandchild Ninigi no Mikoto, the grandson of the sun goddess Amaterasu herself. His descent from the floating bridge of heaven to the peak of Mount Takachiho was a moment of profound significance. He did not come as a conqueror with an army, but as a sovereign bringing the very essence of celestial order. To prepare him for this sacred duty, Amaterasu bestowed upon him 3 divine treasures that would become the sacred imperial regalia of Japan. She gave him the mirror Yota no Kagami, a symbol of her own spirit and the virtue of wisdom. She gave him the sword Kusanagi no Tsurugi, a blade drawn from the tail of a monstrous serpent, representing the virtue of valor. And she gave him the jewel Yasakani no Magatama, a curved, comma-shaped gem embodying the virtue of benevolence. With these 3 treasures, Ninigi no Mikoto descended, his mission framed not as a violent conquest but as a peaceful subjugation. The most powerful of the earthly deities, Onamachi, was persuaded to cede his authority over the land, recognizing the divine right of the heavenly descendant. This event, the pacification of Ashihara, established the unbroken line of Japanese emperors who are considered direct descendants of the sun goddess Amaterasu. The mirror, sword, and jewel remain the ultimate symbols of the imperial throne, housed in shrines to this day, not as weapons of war, but as sacred tokens of a covenant between heaven and earth. This myth presents a unique vision of order, one achieved through a solemn transfer of sovereignty rather than a cataclysmic battle. a foundation built on sacred symbols and an eternal, peaceful lineage. Freedom from a monstrous tyranny demanded a second, more terrible war on the same Irish soil. The Tuatha De Danann, having won Ireland from the Firbolg, now found themselves enslaved. Their king, Brez, was half Fomorian, a race of monstrous, chaotic beings who embodied the harsh, untamable sea. Under his rule, the gods were treated as common serfs, forced to pay crippling tribute to their Fomorian overlords. The poet was forced to carry wood, the warrior to build fortresses, and the land itself groaned under the oppression. When the wounded King Nuada, now fitted with a silver arm that moved as if it were flesh, reclaimed his throne, the Fomorians responded with all the fury of a storm. Their king, the gargantuan Balor, was a walking catastrophe. His single eye, usually kept closed by his servants, could unleash a blast of pure annihilation when opened on the battlefield. Against this terror, a new hero arrived at the gates of the royal hall. His name was Lug Lamfodda, Lug of the Long Arm, and he possessed mastery of every art from smithing to poetry. To prove his worth, he challenged the gatekeeper, asking if any man in the court possessed all these skills. The guard replied they had a master of each, but no master of all. Lug declared that they had one now. He became their champion, and the stage was set for the second battle of Mag Tuaid. The battle was a symphony of magical warfare. Lug used his sling to hurl a stone with such force that it burst Balor's deadly eye, the blast tearing through the Fomorian ranks. The mighty Dagda wielded a club so massive it left furrows in the earth, and his magical harp could change the seasons with its music. The Morrigan, the terrifying goddess of war and fate, fought with primal fury, shattering the enemy's morale with prophecies of their doom. This was not just a fight for land, but a war of liberation, a Celtic struggle to free the very soul of the people from a crushing, monstrous oppression. Across the world, a similar war for the soul of civilization was being waged in the heart of ancient China. The Yellow Emperor Huangdi, a sage ruler and cultural hero, faced a rebellion led by the monstrous deity Qiyu. This was no ordinary foe. Qiyu was a terrifying figure with a bronze head, an iron forehead, and 4 eyes, and he commanded a legion of demons and the elements themselves. In battle, he could conjure a thick, impenetrable fog for 3 days, blinding Huangdi's army and threatening to destroy the nascent order of Chinese civilization. The Yellow Emperor's response was not just brute force but brilliant invention. To navigate the magical fog, he created the south-pointing chariot, an intricate mechanical compass that always indicated the true direction, a marvel of ancient engineering born from the necessity of war. His forces, organized and disciplined, clashed with Qiu's wild, demonic hordes in a conflict that pitted the ideals of culture and order against raw, untamed chaos. The imagery of these two wars reveals their core. The Celtic story is one of breaking chains, a vibrant, chaotic explosion of individual magical prowess against a singular, overwhelming oppressor. Its spirit captured in the endless, interlacing patterns of Celtic knotwork, where every strand is essential to the whole. The Chinese narrative, however, is one of foundational order, where the cultured hero uses wisdom and innovation to carve civilization from the wilderness, a legacy cast in the enduring, ritual beauty of ancient Chinese bronzes. One myth is a cry for freedom, the other a blueprint for empire. Chaos was born in a place of perfect order. Within the timeless halls of heaven, a war erupted not over land or treasure, but over the very nature of authority itself. This is the celestial rebellion from John Milton's Paradise Lost, a conflict that redefined the cosmic landscape. Lucifer, once God's most brilliant and beautiful archangel, grew consumed by pride. He could not bear to be a subordinate, even to the divine. He rallied a full third of the heavenly host to his banner, convincing them with silver-tongued rhetoric that it was better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Arrayed against his rebel legions stood the loyal angels, led by the unwavering Archangel Michael, a warrior of pure and righteous fury. For 3 days, the war raged across the Empyrean plains. This was a battle fought before the invention of death. Angels could be wounded, dismembered, and cast down, but their immortal spirits could not be permanently destroyed. They would simply reform, their essence gathering back into a warrior's shape to rejoin the fray. The very landscape of paradise was torn asunder. Milton describes how the rebels, in a horrifying act of invention, tore up the mountains and hills of heaven and hurled them at the loyalist forces. The sky became a storm of crushing bedrock and soil, a desecration of the divine realm. The faithful angels responded in kind, turning the very weapons of chaos against the rebels. The battlefield became a terrifying, churned-up wasteland, a scar upon perfection. The clash of arms was beyond anything seen on earth. Swords of celestial fire met shields of adamant. The combatants fought with a power that shook the foundations of creation. Yet for all the fury, the war was a stalemate. The rebels could not win, and the loyalists could not deliver a final blow. It was on the 3rd day that the conflict reached its breathtaking climax. God gave his Son, the Messiah, the authority to end the rebellion. Riding forth in the chariot of his divine majesty, a vehicle wreathed in the unapproachable light of the Father's glory, the Son single-handedly entered the battle. His presence alone was a weapon. The rebel lines shattered before him. He drove his chariot straight through their broken ranks, his wheels crushing their misplaced armor. He pursued the fleeing Lucifer to the very edge of heaven, to its crystal walls that overlooked the formless abyss of chaos. With a final, irresistible push of his power, he hurled the archfiend and all his fallen angels headlong into the dreadful void. Their descent lasted 9 days, a tumbling, shrieking fall from grace into a new-made prison of their own design, a place they would name Hell. This war is the ultimate origin story for evil in the Christian tradition. It answers the haunting question of how suffering entered a world created by a benevolent God. The fault lies not with humanity, but with a pre-existing rebellion in the spiritual realm. Lucifer's fall was not a loss of power, but a corruption of purpose. His sin was the desire to place his own will above the divine will, a choice that introduced discord into the symphony of creation. The imagery of this war, captured in the dramatic brushstrokes of classical painters, shows not men, but magnificent beings of light and shadow locked in a struggle for the soul of the cosmos. It is a story that forces us to consider the nature of free will itself and the terrifying power of a single, prideful thought to unravel an entire universe. That celestial war in heaven found its earthly echo in a quest for a simple, golden pelt. The story of Jason and the Argonauts is often remembered as a grand voyage, but its heart beats with the rhythm of relentless, smaller wars. This was a military campaign disguised as a journey, a series of impossible battles Jason had to win to claim his throne. His crew, the Argonauts, was a legendary roster of heroes, including the mighty Hercules and the divine musician Orpheus. Their mission was to retrieve the Golden Fleece from the far-off kingdom of Colchis, a prize that would prove his right to rule. Their first battle was not against a monster, but within a broken society. They landed on the island of Lemnos to find a society in the grip of a terrible gender war. The women of Lemnos, enraged by their husbands' infidelity, had slaughtered every single man on the island. The Argonauts, a crew of powerful men, arrived into this tense, female-dominated world. For a time they stayed, and their presence helped to heal the deep wounds of the community, even fathering a new generation of children. But this was a respite, not their objective. Their true path was lined with violence, as shown in their very next stop. They came to the land of the Bebryces, ruled by the brutal king Amycus, who challenged all visitors to a boxing match and then beat them to death. This time, it was the Argonaut Polydeuces, a champion boxer, who stepped forward. The fight was not a sporting event, it was a duel to the death. Polydeuces, with superior skill and grace, dodged the king's wild swings and delivered a single, devastating blow to his temple, killing him instantly. It was a clear message: the quest would be paved with the bodies of tyrants. The ultimate military objective, however, lay in Colchis. King Eads had no intention of handing over the fleece. He set Jason a series of labors he believed were impossible, a gauntlet of magical warfare. First, Jason had to yoke a pair of monstrous fire-breathing bulls, creatures of pure elemental fury. Then, with these beasts, he had to plow a field and sow it with dragon's teeth. This was no ordinary seed. Each tooth, the moment it hit the soil, sprouted into a fully armed, bloodthirsty warrior. In an instant, Jason found himself standing alone against an entire, spontaneously generated army. His victory here was a masterpiece of tactical cunning. Throwing a heavy stone into the center of the newly born army, he caused the warriors to turn on each other, confused about who had thrown it. They fought and slaughtered one another until not a single soldier remained standing. This was the theme of the entire quest: cleverness and strategy triumphing over mindless force. But none of this would have been possible without a powerful ally, the king's own daughter, the sorceress Medea. Hera, the queen of the gods, had made Medea fall in love with Jason. Her magic was her weapon, and she used it as a form of supernatural warfare. She gave Jason a magical ointment that made him invulnerable to the bull's fiery breath for a single day. When Jason finally faced the final guardian, the colossal, unsleeping dragon that coiled around the fleece itself, it was Medea's sorcery that won the day. She used a potent sleeping potion and enchanting songs to lull the great beast into a deep, temporary slumber, allowing Jason to simply reach in and take the prize. The quest for the Golden Fleece, immortalized on the surfaces of ancient Greek vases showing Jason battling the Earth-born warriors, is the story of a hero who could not succeed by strength alone. It celebrates the art of the clever solution, the strategic alliance, and the recognition that some battles are won not with a sword, but with a well-thrown stone and the help of a powerful, magical friend. A different kind of war raged across the Slavic world, one without a final battle or a lasting peace. This was the eternal struggle between Perun, the mighty god of thunder, and Veles, the cunning god of the underworld. Their conflict was not a linear story with a beginning and an end, but a perpetual cycle woven into the very fabric of existence. Perun ruled the high places, the sky, and the mountaintops, wielding his lightning axe as a symbol of celestial order and law. Veles, in contrast, was a god of the low places, ruling the wet, fertile underworld, the deep waters, and the wealth of cattle. He was a shapeshifter, often appearing as a great, coiling serpent or a shaggy dragon. The tension between them was constant. Veles would inevitably slither up from his watery domain to steal Perun's sacred cattle, or sometimes even his children, hiding them deep within the roots of the world tree. This theft was an act of primal chaos, a challenge to the structured sky. In a furious response, Perun would mount his chariot and pursue the serpentine god across the heavens. His chase was the storm itself. The rumble of thunder was the sound of his chariot wheels, and the brilliant forks of lightning were his axe striking down from the sky, trying to blast Veles from his hiding places within trees, caves, and rivers. Every bolt that scarred the earth was a divine weapon aimed at a slippery, chaotic foe. This cosmic pursuit was the ancient Slavs' explanation for the turning of the year. When Perun finally managed to strike Veles down, banishing him back to the underworld, it symbolized the triumph of spring and summer. The skies cleared, the sun warmed the land, and order was restored. But this victory was never permanent. Veles, the essence of subterranean power and potential, would always recover. His gradual resurgence, his slow creeping back into the world, brought the damp, cold, and darkness of autumn, culminating in his full return during the long, dead winter. The entire cycle would then begin again with a new theft, a new chase, a new storm. This myth presents a world where conflict is not a problem to be solved, but the essential engine of nature. The struggle between the high god and the low god, between the dry sky and the wet earth, between order and chaos, is what creates the world we live in. There is no final victory, only the endless, necessary rhythm of the storm and the calm, the growth and the decay, a divine battle that gives us the seasons themselves. The gods of Teotihuacan understood that a new world could not be spoken into existence. It had to be forged in fire and blood. After 4 previous worlds or suns had been destroyed, the gods gathered in the darkness to create a 5th. They knew a new sun was needed to light the cosmos, but such a star demanded the ultimate price, a divine life sacrificed in a blazing pyre. 2 gods stepped forward. The first was Tecusistecatl, a proud and wealthy deity, adorned with rich feathers and jewels. The second was Nanahuatzin, a humble god, poor and covered in painful sores. The other gods built a massive bonfire that roared for 4 days. When the time came for the great leap, pride faltered. Tecusistecatl approached the inferno, but the sheer heat and terror of the flames made him recoil. He tried 4 times and failed each time. Then it was Nanahuatzin's turn. Without a moment of hesitation, the humble god closed his eyes and threw himself resolutely into the heart of the fire. His body crackled and burned, consumed by the sacred flames. Shamed by this incredible courage, Tecusistecatl finally followed, leaping in after him. The gods waited in the silence, watching the ashes. Suddenly, the sky began to brighten. A brilliant golden sun rose from the east. It was Nanahuatzin transformed. But then, to their astonishment, a second, equally bright sun rose right behind him. The gods had not accounted for 2 sacrifices. The world could not endure 2 suns of equal power. Something had to be done, so one of the gods took a rabbit and threw it at the second sun, dimming its light, and it became the moon. Yet a terrible problem remained. The new sun, Nanahuatzin, hung motionless in the sky. It would not move. The gods realized with a horrifying certainty that their work was not finished. The sun's journey required a force even greater than self-immolation. It required their own lifeblood to set the cosmos in motion, to give the sun the strength to travel its daily path across the heavens. The gods had to offer their own hearts. The god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, began the gruesome ritual, cutting out the hearts of the other deities with a sacred knife. This foundational war of self-sacrifice became the central, terrifying truth of the Aztec cosmos. The sun was not a distant ball of gas, but a divine being that had given its life, and it required constant nourishment to continue its battle against the ever-encroaching darkness. That nourishment was blood. This myth directly informed the Aztec practice of ritual warfare, known as the Flower Wars. These were not primarily fought for territory or plunder, but to capture prisoners. The battlefield was a sacred ground for harvesting the most precious offering, the human heart. The pyramids, like the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, were not just tombs or temples, they were reenactments of that primordial moment. At the summit, on a stone slab, priests would hold down a captive warrior and offer his still beating heart to the sun, just as the gods had offered their own. The blood would flow down the temple steps, a grim echo of the divine sacrifice that kept the universe from collapsing back into eternal night. This was a cosmos perpetually at war, a delicate balance maintained only by a continuous river of blood, a cycle of death giving birth to life itself. The Arctic ice holds a story of betrayal that reshaped the world. In the stark Inuit tradition, a young woman named Sedna lived with her father. Many hunters sought her hand, but she refused them all until a fulmar, a seabird, appeared, promising a life of comfort in a warm tent across the sea. Sedna agreed and went with him, but the promise was a lie. His home was a desolate cliff, and her life became one of cold and hunger. When her father came to visit, he was horrified. He killed the fulmar and fled with Sedna in his boat, but the fulmar's people summoned a terrible storm, and the sea rose in fury. To save his own life, the terrified father did the unthinkable. He threw his own daughter overboard. As Sedna clung desperately to the side of the boat, he chopped off her fingers one by one, her fingers sinking into the dark water, transformed into the seals, walruses, and whales. Sedna herself sank to the bottom of the sea, becoming the powerful and vengeful goddess of the marine creatures, the mistress of life and death for all who depended on her bounty. Her anger is the fury of the ocean. When she is enraged, she withholds the animals, causing famine. She stirs the waters into violent storms. This created a unique form of warfare, a battle fought not with weapons but with spirit. Inuit shamans must undertake a perilous spiritual journey to the ocean floor. Their quest is to find Sedna's submerged home and calm her raging spirit. They must comb the tangles from her long, flowing hair, soothing the anger born of that ancient betrayal. This is a constant, cyclical conflict against the consequences of human sin, a war for survival waged through ritual and reverence. Far from the frozen sea, a different kind of battle was being fought under the Polynesian sun. The demigod Moi was a trickster hero who waged war against the very limits of the cosmos. He did not seek to appease the gods, but to challenge them for the benefit of humanity. His first great campaign was against the sun itself. In those days, the sun raced across the sky, giving people no time to cook their food or dry their crops. Moi decided to slow it down. With the help of his brothers, he wove incredibly strong ropes from his sister's hair. They journeyed to the pit where the sun rose, and as it emerged, they lassoed its burning legs with their magical cords. Moi then beat the sun with his enchanted jawbone until, weakened and humiliated, it agreed to move more slowly across the sky, creating the long, warm days we know. This was a war against time itself, a victory for human civilization, but Moi's ambitions grew. His final, most daring war was against the ultimate enemy, death. He sought to conquer it by entering the body of the goddess of night and death, Hain Nui Te Po, while she slept, and exiting through her mouth, thereby destroying her power. He warned his accompanying birds that they must not laugh, for the mission depended on silence. As Moi began his impossible journey, the sight of the demigod disappearing feet first into the goddess was so absurd that one bird could not contain a chirp of laughter. The goddess awoke, her eyes flashing with fury. She crushed Moi between her thighs of obsidian, ending his life and his quest forever. These two tales present a profound contrast. The story of Sedna is one of a necessary, ongoing peace treaty with a nature that has been wronged, a conflict resolved through spiritual diplomacy. Moi's legends are a celebration of human audacity, a series of glorious, clever assaults on the walls of the impossible, reminding us that some wars are worth fighting even when they are lost. Even the walls of Yurok could not contain the restless energy of its king. Gilgamesh, 2/3 god and 1/3 man, was a tyrant whose boundless strength left his people exhausted. In answer to their prayers, the gods created a wild man named Enkidu, a being of pure nature who would become the king's equal and his only friend. Together, they sought a quest worthy of their power, a feat that would etch their names into eternity. Their target was the distant cedar forest, a realm forbidden to mortals, guarded by a monster whose very name was terror. Humbaba was not a simple beast. He was a giant of incomprehensible form, a divine guardian appointed by the great god Enlil himself. His face was a grotesque whirlwind of coiled entrails, and his roar was the sound of a cataclysmic flood, a weapon that could paralyze the bravest heart. To slay him was to defy a god and conquer nature in its most primal, terrifying state. The journey itself was a form of warfare, a long march through sun-scorched lands and treacherous mountains that tested their resolve. When they finally reached the forest's edge, the air grew thick and silent. The cedar trunks were like bronze pillars, and the canopy above was so dense it blotted out the sun. Every step forward felt like a trespass. Enkidu, the child of the wilderness, felt a deep dread, his hand trembling as he touched the gate. But Gilgamesh, driven by his obsession with immortal fame, pressed on. The battle began not with a clash of swords, but with a psychological siege. Humbaba's voice boomed through the trees, a torrent of threats and divine curses meant to shatter their sanity. The heroes stood firm, and in their darkest moment they called upon the sun god Shamash. He heard their prayers. From the heavens, Shamash summoned 13 mighty winds, a cyclone of dust and debris that blinded Humbaba and pinned the monster in place. With his vision clouded and his devastating roar silenced by the gale, the Guardian was vulnerable. Gilgamesh and Enkidu seized their chance, striking with axe and spear. The fight was brutal and desperate. Humbaba thrashed and roared, but the winds of Shamash held him fast. As the monster weakened, he began to beg for his life, offering to serve Gilgamesh as his personal guardian of the forest. For a moment, pity touched the king's heart, but Enkidu, pragmatic and fearful of the god's wrath, urged his friend to finish the task. With a final, decisive blow, they severed Humbaba's head. The silence that fell over the cedar forest was heavier than any roar. They had felled the sacred trees to build a great gate for Yorak, a monument to their victory. But the price of this triumph was a divine curse. By killing Enlil's appointed guardian, they had committed an unforgivable transgression. The gods would not let this defiance stand, and the consequences would soon pursue Enkidu to his deathbed. This battle, immortalized on cracked clay tablets and the fragmented remains of Mesopotamian reliefs, is one of humanity's oldest stories. It is a powerful metaphor for our eternal struggle to carve civilization from the wild, to seek glory even when it means challenging the very order of the world. The heroes won their fame, but they also learned a terrible lesson, that some victories plant the seeds of future sorrow. A different kind of war was fought not with swords but with song. In the mists of Finnish mythology, the epic Kalevala revolves around a desperate quest for a single, miraculous object, the Sampo. This was not a weapon, but a source of life itself, a magical mill that ground out endless salt, grain, and gold, bringing boundless prosperity to its owner. The old and wise bard Väinämöinen, the eternal smith Ilmarinen, and the fierce young warrior Lemminkainen all desired it for their people in Kalevala. But the Sampo was held in the dark, cold northern land of Pohjola, forged by Ilmarinen himself as a bride price for the daughter of Louhi, the powerful and cunning mistress of the north. When the marriage failed and the bride was lost, Louhi kept the Sampo, leaving the heroes of Kalevala with nothing but longing and a plan for theft. Their journey north was a perilous one, ending not in a direct assault but in a cunning proposal. Väinämöinen used his silver tongue to suggest they share the Sampo's bounty. When Louhi refused, he resorted to his true power, his magical songs. He lulled the entire land of Pohjola to sleep with his enchanting voice, allowing the heroes to locate the Sampo hidden within a mountain and wrench it from its foundation. Their escape, however, was anything but quiet. The theft was discovered, and Louhi's rage was as vast as the northern sea. She conjured a terrible fog to ensnare the fleeing boat, then raised a monstrous army from the depths. She summoned a sea serpent of impossible size and a colossal eagle of fire and shadow to tear the Sampo from their grasp. This was not a battle of brute force, but a symphony of opposing magics. Väinämöinen and his companions fought back with the very essence of their culture, their songs. Väinämöinen sang the sea serpent into a harmless log. He sang wounds onto the body of the great eagle. Their voices were their swords and shields, a testament to the power of wisdom and art over raw, destructive sorcery. But the conflict was too great for even their magic to contain completely. In the final, chaotic moments of the sea battle, the Sampo was wrenched from the boat and shattered against the waves, its precious pieces scattering across the ocean. Louhi managed to salvage only a single, small fragment, enough to grant Pohjola some meager fortune. The rest of the pieces, however, washed ashore, seeding the world with their residual magic. This was not the victory they had planned, but it was a victory nonetheless. The pieces of the Sampo brought what prosperity they could to the world, an explanation for why the earth yields its bounty unevenly. The story, brought to life in evocative paintings of the heroes on their ship battling mythical beasts, uses this magical artifact war to explore a profound truth. Some conflicts are not about total victory, but about breaking a monopoly on wealth and allowing abundance to scatter, however imperfectly, for the benefit of all. The clash of father and son is a tragedy written across the stars, but in the Persian Book of Kings, it becomes the very heart of a nation's soul. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh is more than a collection of poems. It is the epic chronicle of Iran, a tapestry woven with threads of legendary wars that define the eternal struggle between civilization and the wild forces of chaos. For generations, the narrative is framed by the monumental conflict between the Kingdom of Iran and its northern rival, Turan. This is not a single battle, but a cyclical war that spans centuries, pitting the ordered world of kings and codes against the chaotic, nomadic hordes from the steppes. At the center of this grand conflict stands Rostam, Iran's mightiest champion, a hero of 7 legendary quests whose strength is the shield of the entire kingdom. His greatest tragedy unfolds not on a vast battlefield, but in a personal duel shrouded in cruel irony. For years, Rostam had traveled to Turan, and there he met and married a princess. He left before learning she had borne him a son, Sohrab. The boy grew into a warrior of phenomenal skill, dreaming only of finding his legendary father and uniting their strength to bring peace. Eager to find Rostam, Sohrab leads a Turanian army against Iran, his true identity hidden from all. The Persian king, fearing this prodigious young champion, calls for his own hero, Rostam, who arrives at the camp in disguise. When father and son meet, they see only a formidable enemy. They agree to single combat. The fight is fierce and evenly matched, a testament to their shared, incredible prowess. It is only when Rostam gains the upper hand and delivers a mortal wound that the truth is revealed. As Sohrab lies dying, he reveals the token his mother gave him, a bracelet meant to identify him to his father. Rostam looks upon the armband and sees his own seal, realizing he has slain his only son. The scene is one of unparalleled heartbreak, a moment where the demands of national honor and the brutal mechanics of war extinguish the most sacred of personal bonds. This theme of cosmic justice and the price of power echoes in an earlier tale, that of King Feridun. He was the righteous ruler who overthrew the serpent-shouldered demon king Zohak, a tyrant whose very existence was a blight upon the world. Zohak's shoulders were cursed, each sprouting a venomous serpent that could only be sated by feeding on the brains of 2 human youths each day. Feridun, armed with a divine bull-headed mace, liberated the people from this monstrous oppression, yet his own reign was later marred by a terrible conflict between his 3 sons, a war that sowed the very seeds of the Iran-Turan rivalry. These stories are not merely about victory or defeat. They are profound explorations of destiny, where the greatest hero is doomed to destroy what he loves most. They question the nature of honor when it leads a father to kill his child. The Shahnameh presents heroism not as a path to glory, but as a burden laden with immense personal cost. The legacy of these epic conflicts is visually preserved in the breathtaking art of Persian miniatures, where every scene is rendered in lavish gold and lapis lazuli, the intricate calligraphy framing warriors and kings in a dance of fate that feels both timeless and devastatingly human. Creation itself began with a celestial dispute over who would shape the world. In the Yoruba tradition, the supreme god Olodumare held the sacred materials needed to form the earth: a chain, a snail shell filled with earth, and a single 5-toed chicken. He entrusted this profound task to the firstborn son, the god Obatala. Obatala's journey from the heavens was to be one of quiet focus and sober intention, but along the way he passed a grove of palm trees. Drawn to the sap, he tapped the trees and drank the sweet, fermenting palm wine. The intoxication overwhelmed him, and he fell into a deep, careless sleep, the sacred mission entirely forgotten. High above, Olodumare saw the failure and knew the work could not wait. he summoned Ojujuwa, Obatala's younger brother, and placed the tools of creation into his hands. This was not a simple reassignment, it was a transfer of divine authority, a peaceful but decisive war of succession fought not with weapons but with competence and readiness. Ojujuwa did not hesitate. He lowered the chain from the boundaries of space and climbed down onto the vast primordial ocean that covered everything. Standing on the water, he poured the soil from the snail shell onto its surface. Then he released the five-toed chicken. The bird scrambled and scratched at the earth, spreading it across the waters until a wide, solid land began to form. This place became known as Isle Ife, the sacred city where the world began, the navel of all existence. When Obatala awoke, sober and filled with shame, he found the world already made and his brother established as its rightful creator. Though a conflict simmered between them, they eventually reconciled, with Obatala receiving the honored role of shaping human bodies from clay. This foundational myth explains the origins of the Yoruba people, for Ojujuwa became the first Uni, the divine king of Ife, and the progenitor of all subsequent Yoruba royal lineages. The story is powerfully captured in the art of the region, particularly in the exquisite bronze and terracotta sculptures from Ife, which portray the serene and dignified faces of the kings, their heads crowned with elaborate beaded regalia, symbolizing their direct descent from the god who formed the earth from the waters. This was a war over responsibility, where the world itself was the prize, and its legacy is a kingdom whose sacred origin is remembered in every ritual and every crown. The earth remembers the battles of its first ancestors. In the vastness of the Australian desert, the Dreamtime is not a distant past but a continuous reality, where the land itself is a living map of ancient conflicts. One of its most gripping tales is the War of the Wati Kutjara, the two men, against the cannibalistic giant Wati Niru. This was a desperate chase for survival that sculpted the continent. The giant, driven by a dark hunger, pursued the two ancestral men across the Red Plains, but they were clever and resourceful. As they fled, they performed powerful songs and rituals, creating sacred sites and landmarks to slow their monstrous pursuer. They danced the emu dance, and their footprints became a chain of waterholes. They sang the spear thorn into existence, a plant whose sharp spines could wound the giant. This epic pursuit was not merely an escape, it was an act of creation, a war where every dodge and feint left a permanent scar of beauty and meaning on the empty landscape. The journey of the Wati Kutjara defined the songlines, the invisible pathways that crisscross Australia, serving as both a navigation system and a legal charter for the people, a story written not on paper but in the very hills and rivers. A similar creative violence echoes in the skies over North America. From the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains, oral traditions tell of a perpetual war between the thunderbird and the great water serpents. The thunderbird is a being of immense power, so large that the flapping of its wings creates the rumble of thunder, and the flash of its eyes is lightning. It is the master of the upper world, the storms and the sky. Its eternal enemies are the horned serpents or underwater panthers, monstrous creatures that control the waters below, causing floods and dragging the unwary to their doom. Their battles are cataclysmic clashes of elemental forces. When the thunderbird swoops down from its mountain peak to seize a serpent in its talons, the struggle churns the lakes into fury and cracks the earth. The serpent thrashes, carving out new riverbeds and canyons. The thunderbird's lightning strikes scorch the land, leaving behind glassy fulgurites and exposed cliffs. These stories are not just explanations for thunderstorms and flash floods, they are the foundation of cultural lore and identity. For the peoples of the Pacific Northwest, the thunderbird is a central crest, its image carved onto towering totem poles that declare a family's lineage and history. The Kwakwaka'wakwa and other nations perform elaborate dances where dancers wearing immense, articulated thunderbird masks reenact these cosmic battles, reminding everyone of the delicate balance between the sky world and the water world. The proof of these ancient wars is everywhere. In the deserts of Australia, the weathered domes of Uluru and Kota Tjuta are not just rocks, they are the frozen bodies of ancestral beings from other Dreamtime conflicts. The swirling patterns on ancient rock art panels depict the two men and the giant Wati Niru, a permanent record of that legendary chase. In North America, a specific mountain range might be the petrified body of a defeated serpent, or a peculiar rock formation the nest of a thunderbird. These landscapes are not passive scenery, they are the enduring monuments to wars that shaped the moral and physical world, a constant reminder that the land is alive with story, and every cliff and river has a tale of a spectacular mythical battle. A queen's greed for a single bull could unleash a war that shattered an entire kingdom. This is the Tain Bo Cuelge, the cattle raid of Cooley, the great epic of the Ulster cycle. Queen Medb of Connacht, a ruler of immense ambition and pride, believed that her wealth surpassed her husband's in every way save for one thing: he owned a magnificent white-horned bull. To truly equal him, she set her sights on the only bull in Ireland that could rival his, the legendary brown bull of Cooley from the province of Ulster. When its owner refused to sell it, Medb assembled a massive army from all corners of Ireland and launched a full-scale invasion to take it by force. Yet as her forces marched, a strange and terrible curse fell upon the warriors of Ulster. A goddess's ancient magic, born from the pangs of childbirth, struck every able-bodied man with debilitating weakness, leaving them helpless in their beds. The entire province was defenseless save for one person. He was not a seasoned general or a grizzled veteran. He was a 17-year-old boy named Setanta, a figure you might know better by the name he earned as a child, Cuchulainn. He stood alone against the invading horde, a one-man army tasked with the impossible. His strategy was one of guerrilla warfare and psychological terror. He used the dense forests and misty bogs of the Ulster landscape to his advantage, harrying the edges of Medb's army. He would appear from the fog, strike with blinding speed, and vanish before a proper counterattack could be mounted. He enforced his own rules of engagement, challenging the champions of Connacht to single combat at fords and river crossings. One by one, he met them and defeated them, stacking their heads on stones as grim warnings to the rest of the army. But when faced with overwhelming numbers, Cuchulainn would unleash his most terrifying weapon, a physiological transformation known as the Ryostrad or warp spasm. It was a horrific sight to behold. His body would contort violently, twisting and swelling into a monstrous form. One eye would sink deep into his skull, while the other bulged out, red and raging. His mouth stretched wide, spewing fire and blood. Every muscle and sinew writhed beneath his skin, and a warrior's light, a halo of pure fury, blazed from his forehead. In this state, he was no longer a hero, but an indiscriminate force of nature, a whirlwind of death that could not tell friend from foe. The true tragedy of the war, however, lay not in these monstrous battles, but in the personal ones. The code of honor demanded he fight any champion sent against him, and Queen Medb, in her cunning, soon realized his greatest weakness was his heart. She forced him into combat against his own closest friends and his beloved foster brother Ferdiad. They had trained together in youth, sworn to protect one another. For 3 days they fought at the ford, their skills so evenly matched that neither could gain an advantage. They shared food and healing herbs at the end of each brutal day, lamenting the fate that pitted them against each other. On the final day, driven by desperation and the weight of his duty, Cuchulainn was forced to resort to his legendary spear, the Gíbolg, a weapon that spread into 30 barbs upon entering the body. He killed the man who was like a brother to him, and his victory wail was a cry of pure anguish. He had saved Ulster, but the cost was a piece of his own humanity. The brown bull was indeed captured, but the prize was meaningless. It fought and killed Medb's own white bull in a final, destructive confrontation before its own heart burst from the strain. The epic ends not with glorious celebration, but with the devastation left in the wake of a queen's pride and a hero's terrible burden. The rolling green hills of Cooley and the ancient ruins of Ulster stand as silent witnesses to this story, a saga where the most spectacular battles were fought not for a kingdom, but for honor, and where the greatest enemy was often the price of victory itself. Chaos was a living sea, a mother of all things. Before the heavens had a name, the world was nothing but swirling, salt waters, the primordial goddess Tiamat, mingling with the sweet waters of her husband Apsu. From their union, the first generations of gods were born, but these new deities were loud and vibrant, and their noise disturbed the deep, silent rest of Apsu. He resolved to destroy his own children to regain his peace. The younger god a master of magic and wisdom, learned of this plot. He cast a powerful spell of sleep upon Apsu, slew him, and built his own temple upon the slain god's body. There in that temple, and his wife Damkina gave birth to Marduk, a god of such radiant and terrible power that he was destined to shatter the old order. But Tiamat, the great sea, was now a widow, and her grief curdled into a monstrous rage. The other gods, fearing her wrath, had nowhere to turn. They created an army of horrors to fight for them, 11 species of monsters born from Tiamat's fury, each more terrifying than the last. She gave leadership of this legion not to another god, but to her new consort, the god Kingu, and she bestowed upon him the Tablet of Destinies, the object that held the power to command the cosmos itself. The gods of the new generation were terrified. They had no champion who could face this oceanic vengeance. They turned to the young Marduk and they made him a deal. If he could defeat Tiamat and save them, they would grant him supreme kingship over the entire pantheon. Marduk agreed, but he demanded absolute authority. He prepared for the battle not just with a weapon, but with the elements. He created the 4 great winds, the tempest, the whirlwind, and the hurricane, and he held them in his control. He mounted his storm chariot, drawn by 4 devastating steeds, and he rode out to meet the primordial mother. The confrontation was the ultimate clash between the old, chaotic womb of creation and the new, structured will to rule. Tiamat opened her massive jaws, a gateway to the void, to swallow Marduk whole, but he was ready. He forced the raging winds he commanded into her mouth, inflating her body until she was bloated and immobilized. Then, with a single, perfect shot, he drove his arrow into her distended belly, tearing her apart. The war was not over. Marduk then turned his attention to Kingu, Tiamat's commander. He easily defeated him, wresting the Tablet of Destinies from his grasp and stripping him of his stolen power. But Marduk's greatest act was yet to come. Standing over the corpse of the great sea goddess, he did not simply discard her body. He performed an act of cosmic creation from the remains of his enemy. He split her carcass into 2 halves like a giant clamshell. With one half, he arched the heavens, creating the sky and ordering the stars. With the other, he formed the solid earth, anchoring the mountains and carving out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from her eyes. From the blood of the executed Kingu, he mixed it with clay to create the first human beings, a race destined to serve the gods so that the divinities could rest. This myth, the Enuma Elish, was far more than a creation story. It was a piece of profound political propaganda. As the city of Babylon rose to power, its priests codified this epic to explain and justify the ascent of their own patron god, Marduk, to the head of the Mesopotamian pantheon, replacing older gods like Enlil. The terrifying Mus letter 1, E2, Bus U dragon, a creature with the head of a serpent, the body of a lion, and the hind legs of an eagle, once associated with other deities, was now depicted as Marduk's loyal servant, captured forever on the glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate. This was a war that built a universe and crowned a king, all from the body of a vengeful mother. Even the nectar of immortality could not bring lasting peace. The struggle between the Devas and the Asuras is the great, unending war of Hindu mythology, a cosmic tug of war between the forces of light and the powers of darkness. The Devas are the gods of order, spirituality, and the celestial realms. The Asuras are their constant adversaries, not simple monsters, but powerful anti-gods who embody materialism, ego, and raw, untamed power. They are so formidable because they are masters of austerity and penance. An Asura king would stand on one foot for thousands of years, chanting sacred mantras until the creator god Brahma himself was compelled to appear and grant him a boon. These boons are what make the Asuras nearly invincible. A demon might ask that he cannot be killed by any god, man, or animal, or that he can only be slain by a being who has not yet been born. Armed with these divine loopholes, the Asuras repeatedly conquer the heavens, casting the Devas into exile and plunging the universe into chaos. This forces the gods to become clever, to seek solutions not through brute force, but through wisdom and divine intervention. The most famous collaboration between these rival forces is also the one that reveals their inherent conflict. This was the churning of the ocean of milk. The Devas, weakened and defeated, needed the nectar of immortality to regain their supremacy, but the task was too great for them alone. They formed a temporary alliance with the Asuras to churn the cosmic ocean. They used the massive serpent king Vasuki as a rope and the great mountain Mandara as a churning rod. The Devas held the serpent's tail, while the Asuras, deceived into thinking the head was the position of honor, took the front, breathing the fiery poison the serpent exhaled. For centuries they churned, and from the ocean emerged incredible treasures, both beautiful and deadly. Finally, the physician of the gods, Danvantari, arose holding the pot of Amrita, the nectar of immortality. The truce shattered in an instant. The Asuras snatched the pot, and a great battle erupted. It was then that the god Vishnu took the form of the enchanting Mohini, a beautiful woman who distracted the Asuras, recovered the nectar, and served it only to the Devas, ensuring the cosmic balance was restored, at least for a time. This cycle of Asuric ambition and divine response is the engine of many of Hinduism's greatest stories. It is why Vishnu, the preserver, descends to earth in his many avatars. When the Asura king Hiranyakashipu gained a boon that he could not be killed by day or night, inside or outside, by man or beast, Vishnu incarnated as Narasimha, a being who was half man and half lion. At twilight, which is neither day nor night, he dragged the demon to the threshold of his palace, which is neither inside nor outside, and tore him apart with his claws. When the demon Bali used his piety to conquer the three worlds, Vishnu came as Vamana, a dwarf. He asked the king for a simple gift, only as much land as he could cover in 3 steps. Bali agreed, and the dwarf then expanded into a cosmic giant, covering the earth, the heavens, and the entire universe in 2 steps, pushing Bali into the underworld with the 3rd. This eternal conflict is vividly captured in the vibrant art that adorns Hindu temples. Elaborate carvings show the gods and demons locked in their epic struggle, their faces frozen in expressions of divine serenity and demonic fury. The war is not just a story, it is a profound metaphysical truth. The Devas represent our higher consciousness, our pursuit of spiritual light and selfless duty. The Asuras represent the powerful pull of the ego, our attachment to material wealth, and the intoxicating desire for personal power. The battlefield is not just the heavens, it is the human heart. Every time we choose compassion over greed or truth over deception, we are fighting on the side of the Devas. This is a war without a final victory, a necessary tension that keeps the universe and our own souls in a dynamic, ever-turning balance. A single insult can unravel an entire kingdom. The second branch of the Welsh Mabinogion begins not with swords, but with a wedding, a diplomatic union meant to secure peace between the island of Britain and Ireland. The Welsh giant King Bendigeidfran, or Bran the Blessed, agreed to give his beautiful sister Branwen in marriage to Matholwch, the King of Ireland. but during the wedding feast in Wales, Bran's half-brother Efnisien arrived in a fury. He was a man of spite and chaos, enraged that his opinion on the marriage had not been sought. In his wrath, he mutilated Matholwch's horses, a grievous insult to the Irish king's honor. This single act of petty violence poisoned the well of peace. Though Bran tried to make amends with vast gifts of gold and a magical cauldron that could restore the dead to life, the humiliation festered in Matholwch's heart. He returned to Ireland with Branwen, and for a year he treated her with cold courtesy. But then his courtiers, reminding him of the insult, persuaded him to punish her. The queen was cast out of her chambers and forced to work in the castle kitchens, beaten daily by the butcher. For 3 years she endured this shame in silence. Yet she was clever and resourceful. She tamed a starling, teaching it to recognize her brother's face. She tied a letter to its leg and sent the bird across the Irish Sea. When the starling found the giant King Bran and delivered its message, his wrath was immediate and absolute. He mustered the entire military might of Britain and waded across the sea, his colossal form so vast that his ship sailed in his shadow. The Welsh host landed on the shores of Ireland, a force of overwhelming power. The Irish, terrified, sued for peace. They agreed to build a house large enough to entertain Bran, a gesture of reconciliation. But it was a trap. Inside, they hid 200 armed warriors in bags hanging from the pillars, planning to ambush the Welsh king. Efnisien, the same man who had started the war, arrived with the British party. His suspicious nature now served his king. He entered the great hall and, feigning curiosity, crushed the head of every single warrior hidden in the bags, asking if the sacks contained flour or something else. The massacre was discovered and the peace shattered in an instant. The battle that followed was one of total annihilation. The fighting was so fierce that nearly every warrior on both sides was slaughtered. The Irish had one final advantage. The magical cauldron of rebirth Bran had given them as a peace offering. They would place their dead inside, and by morning they would emerge alive, though forever silent. They could replenish their army while the Welsh could not. Seeing this, Efnisien knew he had to break this cycle of death. In a final, desperate act, he hid among the Irish corpses and was thrown into the cauldron. From within, he stretched his body with all his might, straining until his heart burst and the magical vessel shattered into 4 pieces. The cost of this victory was absolute. Of the immense Welsh host, only 7 men survived, plus the wise bard Taliesin. Bran himself was mortally wounded by a poisoned spear. With his dying breath, he commanded his 7 companions to cut off his head. They were to carry it back to Wales, to the White Mount in London, and bury it facing France as a guardian against future invasion. The story does not end with a triumphant return. Branwen, rescued from her torment, sailed back to Wales with the survivors. As she stepped ashore on the banks of the River Alor, she looked out at the 2 ruined kingdoms, one laid waste for her sake, the other destroyed for her shame. Her heart broke with the weight of it all. They buried her there on the riverbank, a queen whose story became a grave marker for tens of thousands. The 7 survivors, accompanied by the talking head of Bran, spent 80 years in a timeless, joyful feast, the head still speaking as if the king lived. This tale is a profound Celtic meditation on the spiral of violence. It was not a grand cause that led to ruin, but a personal insult left to fester, a failure of diplomacy, and the uncontrollable nature of pride. The landscape itself holds the echo of this tragedy, from the ancient hill forts of Harlech to the mystical lore surrounding the Tower of London, said to be built over Bran's sacred burial site. His head, facing the continent, was a final, silent plea for a peace that his own story could never achieve. A dragon's hunger can eclipse the sky. In the Philippines, the cosmic order is defended not by gods but by ordinary people. The great sea dragon Baccanoa, a serpent of immense power, rises from the depths of the ocean, its massive body coiling into the heavens to devour the moon. Each time it succeeds, the world is plunged into an unnatural darkness, a lunar eclipse that signals the dragon's temporary victory. The people understand this is a war for the very rhythm of life. They do not stand by in fear. They rush from their homes armed with the only weapons that can drive the beast away: noise and prayer. They bang on pots and pans, shout into the night, and play loud, percussive music on their gongs and drums, creating a cacophony of human defiance. They offer fervent prayers to the moon, begging it to fight back and break free from the dragon's grasp. This celestial struggle is brought to life in the vibrant, fearsome masks used in traditional dances, where performers embody the writhing dragon. Its gaping maw and serpentine form a spectacle of terror and awe. This myth is a story of communal responsibility, where humanity's collective voice becomes a shield for the cosmos itself. Far to the north, a different kind of war was fought to build a nation, not just defend it. The Korean foundation myth begins with a heavenly prince named Hwanung, who looked down from the sky and yearned to rule a human world with wisdom and benevolence. He descended with 3,000 followers to a sacred place under a sandalwood tree on Mount Taebaek, a peak that remains one of Korea's most revered sites. He established a divine city governing over human laws, agriculture, medicine, and the arts, but a profound conflict was needed to create a true king. A tiger and a bear came to Hwanung, praying to become human. He gave them a bundle of sacred mugwort and 20 cloves of garlic, instructing them to stay in a dark cave for 100 days, avoiding the sunlight. The tiger, representing brute strength and impatience, soon gave up and fled. The bear, embodying perseverance and devotion, endured the trial. On the 21st day, she was transformed into a graceful woman, Annayo. She later gave birth to a son, Dangun Wangyom, a child born of both divine will and earthly endurance. Dangun's journey was not a peaceful one. To establish his kingdom of Gojoseon, the first Korean kingdom, he had to contend with rival gods and warring tribes, consolidating his power through both diplomacy and conflict. He represented a new order, a sacred union between the heavenly principles brought by his father and the resilient spirit of the earth inherited from his mother. Where the Bakunawa myth shows humanity uniting to protect an existing cosmic balance from a monster of chaos, the Dangun myth illustrates a divine founder establishing a new earthly order through struggle and transformation. One is a battle of preservation, the other a war of creation, two powerful East Asian tales that remind us how our oldest stories map the timeless conflicts between order and chaos, heaven and earth. Dangun's victory was more than the founding of a kingdom, it became the soul of a nation. This myth of divine descent and earthly struggle was carefully woven into the fabric of Korean identity for over 2,000 years, a narrative weapon used to unify the peninsula and assert its cultural sovereignty. The story itself evolved, absorbing the philosophical currents of each new era. Its shamanistic heart, with the bear's transformation and the sacred mountain, spoke to an ancient connection with the natural world. Later, Buddhist scholars interpreted Hwanung's descent as a compassionate bodhisattva's mission to enlighten humanity, while Confucian historians framed Dangun as the perfect virtuous king, establishing a model of righteous rule and social order. The core message, however, remained constant. The Korean people were uniquely blessed, their rulers endowed with a divine mandate that set them apart from their powerful neighbors. This concept, often called Dangun nationalism, provided a powerful ideological shield. During periods of foreign invasion or domination, from the Mongol empires to the Japanese colonial era, the myth of Dangun was a potent reminder of a glorious, independent origin. It fostered a narrative of resilience, suggesting that just as the bear endured darkness to become human, the Korean people could endure any hardship and emerge transformed, their divine essence intact. This was not just a story from the past, it was a promise for the future. This legacy is vibrantly alive today in the annual Gichanjeol ceremony, the National Foundation Day. Held on October 3rd, it commemorates the day Hwanung descended from heaven to begin his sacred work. At ceremonies at the sacred site of Samseonghyeol in Seoul, you can see traditional rituals performed by descendants of the earliest clans, a direct link to that mythical beginning. The event is a living tapestry of the myth's layers, featuring shamanistic prayers, Confucian-style reverence for ancestors, and modern patriotic fervor, all celebrating the unbroken line from a heavenly prince to the modern Korean state. Ancient maps showing the expansive realm of Gojoseon and the intricate brushstrokes of historic paintings depicting Dangun's reign are not mere artifacts, they are chapters in a continuous story. The mythical conflicts Dangun overcame to establish his rule, the wars against rival gods and chaotic tribes, were seen as a divine blueprint for every historical struggle that followed, from resisting foreign empires to rebuilding after a devastating war. The myth provided an unshakable foundation, a belief that this culture, born from the perseverance of a bear and the wisdom of a god, was destined to endure. From cosmic rebellions to tragic heroics, we have journeyed across 30 spectacular tales of mythical warfare. These stories span the globe, yet they echo with shared themes that feel strangely familiar. We see the eternal struggle between order and chaos in the thunder of Zeus and the churning of the ocean of milk. We witness the heartbreaking cost of duty in the duel between Rostam and Sohrab, and the devastating spiral of violence that began with a simple insult in the Mabinogion. We find the courage to challenge impossible odds in the lone stand of Ku Chulainn and the celestial leap of Nanahuatzin. These are not just ancient fictions. They are the foundational dramas of humanity, our oldest attempts to answer the questions that still haunt us. Why must we fight? What makes a victory truly righteous? How do we find meaning in the chaos of conflict? These myths endure because they are mirrors held up to our own world, reflecting our deepest fears about power, our highest aspirations for honor, and our timeless search for purpose in a universe that often feels at war with itself. So we leave you with this final question to ponder. Which of these mythical battles do you think holds the deepest truth about our own world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We are truly curious to hear which story resonated most with you. If you were captivated by these epic clashes, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the greatest historical mysteries. Explore our full playlist to continue the adventure, where epic tales and legendary secrets are always waiting to be uncovered. These spectacular tales of mythical warfare are not locked away in dusty libraries. They are alive and well, playing out on our movie screens every single summer. Think of the epic battles in superhero films, where a god from another world must defend our planet from a cosmic threat. The archetypes are instantly recognizable: the hero on a quest for justice, the trickster who plays by their own rules, the ancient monster that embodies pure chaos. We are still telling the same stories, simply dressing them in new costumes and special effects. Video games plunge us directly into these archetypal conflicts, allowing us to become the hero who wields a legendary weapon against an overwhelming Dark Lord. We are not just passive observers, we are active participants in the grand, cyclical drama of order versus chaos. The language of these myths even shapes our political world, where leaders might frame a complex struggle as a simple, epic battle between good and evil, casting themselves as the righteous champion and their opponents as a monstrous existential threat. This is not a coincidence. These patterns resonate because they are hardwired into how we understand conflict and purpose. The next time you watch a blockbuster film or dive into a sprawling fantasy game, pause for a moment and look past the computer-generated spectacle. You will likely see the ghost of an ancient myth staring back at you. The hero's journey, the wise mentor, the ultimate sacrifice. These are the timeless blueprints for the stories we cannot stop telling ourselves. They help us process our deepest fears about power and our highest hopes for redemption, proving that the human heart has always been the truest